Whether you like it or not, if you have been socialized, and you have been, if you're watching this video, it matters a great deal to you to be good. Most people think that the key to being a good person is to disown, condemn, and eradicate anything bad from yourself, while owning, glorifying, and maintaining anything that is good about yourself. The problem is, most people are wrong about this. In today's episode, I'm going to explain why one of the most powerful things you can do to be a good person is to take ownership of what makes you a bad guy. First, let's look at the issue with the mentality that the key to being good is to eradicate what is bad and wrong from you. First, this is very black or white thinking. Black or white thinking is definitely simpler, but it is rarely a reflection of what is real and true. To understand what I mean, let's take something like the character trait of envy. Envy, or I should say, what people do in response to envy, can ruin their life. It can ruin your life if you have an envy issue, right? It can make you compete in ways that are self-sabotaging. It eats you up inside. It creates intense levels of stress. It can cause you to act in ways that absolutely destroy relationships. To the opposite, it can be a very strong motivator to improve and to succeed. It can make you aware of exactly what you want, and therefore it can be a very good tool for self-awareness. It can also enhance relationships because it is a recognition of things like the other person's achievements and positive attributes. 2, badness and wrongness is really subjective. It varies so much from one social group to the next, from one family to the next, and one culture to the next. The vast majority of people who have not reached the level of consciousness where they truly take others as a part of themselves and thus intrinsically cannot harm others without harming themselves. A point where others' suffering is their suffering and others' joy is their joy. The reality right now is that if you took all the things that humans consider to be bad and wrong, you will notice quite quickly that they are the things that cause a problem for other people. They cause disharmony in the social group. This is because humans are a group social species. Our survival and ability to thrive depends on being part of the group, being accepted by the group, and having closeness with the group. If the group sees us as bad, this does not happen. They reject us and push us away. And because of this, for the vast majority of people on Earth, the reason that they want to be good is because goodness is what guarantees them that the social group will accept them and bring them close. After all, this will mean their needs are met and they can have a high sense of self-esteem because they're getting that positive reflection. Most people are extrinsically motivated to be good. This is why a person's sense of goodness is defined by a person's social group. But man, do social groups not agree. For example, one family sees competition and a competitive nature as a really bad thing, which is going to lead to the corrosion of relationships. The next family sees it as a really good thing, which is absolutely going to lead to success. One culture sees direct eye contact as polite and engaged. Another sees it as disrespectful and super aggressive. One culture sees blunt honesty as absolute rudeness and unnecessariness. The other sees it as integrity. Also, these ideas tend to change over time. Don't forget that at one time, many people thought slavery was actually a good thing, due to things like deeming it necessary for industry and believing that certain people lacked the ability to run their own lives and therefore benefited and were happier, even happier by other people running their lives for them, and that it was a useful form of punishment for reforming of bad behavior. Now it's widely seen as a terrible thing. Also today, being educated is considered a great thing, right? If somebody says, oh, that person's educated, especially a woman, people are like, oh, that's a good trait, right? But guess what? For a good chunk of history, being educated as a woman was considered a very bad thing due to things like thinking that educating women would undermine the institution of marriage and cause the destruction of society itself, believing that women could not handle mental strain and were easily corrupted, and thus education would lead to nervous collapse and corruption. Take this 1875 quote from Sex and Education, or A Fair Chance for Girls, by Edward Clark. While girls can go to school and study as boys do, this will cause them to suffer from neuralgia, uterine disease, hysteria, and other derangements of the nervous system. 3, so many of the things people think are bad aren't actually bad. We just think they are. Good example of this today is negative emotions. Take anger. Anger is an emotion that occurs when someone's boundaries that define their best interests are being violated, especially when that person feels powerless to getting the other person to stop violating their best interests. The emotion of anger is the reaction to that experience. It's an alarm bell going off within them saying, this is a no for me, and motivating the person to do something about that. The emotion is not a behavior. A person may choose to behave in a certain way because they feel anger, but the behavior is then the next thing up to be examined and questioned in terms of goodness or badness. If we want to have it in the context of this conversation, but not the emotion, right? When a person has no anger, they have no personal sense of their own boundaries, no sense of what is right and good for them versus bad and wrong for them. As people, we do not deeply question our sense of what is right and what is good. We simply accept it. We swallow it, hook, line, and sinker, and act according to the idea of good and bad that we've been socialized into and indoctrinated with. 4, when we try to reject and push away what is bad about us, it doesn't actually work. All that happens is that we suppress, we deny, and we disown it. We go into resistance about it. We create an internal triangulation dynamic that causes us to develop a core self-concept of shame. We create a split in our own consciousness, and these aspects of ourself go to war. We are forever after at war with ourselves. Also, when we resist something like this, we're actually feeding it energy, so the monster that we're afraid of actually grows bigger and badder and finds new, ever creative ways to rear its head. For example, let's look at the Latter-day Saint culture of Utah, otherwise known as the world of Mormons. This is a sexually repressed culture where sex is seen as bad and wrong outside of very specific parameters. Well, guess what? They lead the entire United States in being number 1 in online porn subscriptions. The gold medal goes to Utah. 5, when we suppress, deny, disown, and reject a bad part of ourselves, we push it out of our conscious awareness. We lose self-awareness, most especially of these parts of ourself that we see as bad and wrong. We do this to try to preserve a sense of self-concept. We find it so tormenting to see ourselves as bad that we decide not to see anything about ourselves that would cause us to consider ourselves bad. This is why nobody's the villain in their own personal story. If you want to know more about this, you can watch my video that is titled Self-Concept, the Enemy of Awakening. When this happens, those traits are actually subconsciously in control of us, and we don't even know it. As a result, we are hurting people left and right. But we're convinced that we are doing the good thing and doing the right thing. In other words, the cultural taboo around badness makes it so that we can't face and go into denial of the things within us that would cause us to see ourselves and be seen as bad. But they are nonetheless very alive and well in us, forever finding sneakier ways to come out. 6, a great many of the things that a person might be judged as bad for are not things that should be eradicated, as they are in fact necessary for them to keep. Many things in life have 2 sides to them. In fact, there's this very old saying that's always been one of my absolute favorites that goes, that which can poison can also heal, and anything that can heal can also poison. You will come to find when you take the time to understand anything deep enough that each thing comes with what we would call positive and negative potentials. Because of this, you cannot devalue anything in its entirety. Also, a person's desires and the fulfillment of their potential and purpose in life is often dependent on things that they consider bad. Because of these reasons, and to be honest, I'm sure that I could come up with a lot more given enough time, the way to become a good person, and in this context, we mean someone who behaves in a way that promotes positive outcomes and well-being for other people, is to own your badness. What it means to own your badness is to accept that it is a part of you rather than pushing it away. And from there, get very curious so as to see, hear, feel, and understand that part of you. And from there, with the information you gathered about it, decide what to do with it consciously. When you do this, you will be faced with the choice to either make changes and shift that thing about you, or to accommodate that thing about you in a way that promotes positive outcomes and well-being for other people, or to do a mix of the two. If you want to learn even more about this concept make sure that you also watch my video that is titled Double Down or Choose to Change. So that you can understand this, here's an example. Horatio is very, very competitive as a person. He has been told that his competitive nature is a really big problem. One of his brothers refuses to even talk to him because of it. He spent many years feeling guilty about being competitive and then slipping back into being competitive. It's been this cycle for years. He used to wish that he could just take a knife and cut the part of him out. Horatio is now a salesman at a renewable energy company, and he has recently tripped on the idea of taking responsibility for his negative personality traits in the workplace when it was presented at a business conference. This business talk has caused him to consider that his competitive nature is what pays his bills, and is also what makes him so much more successful than all the other salesmen in the company. And so, it can't be all bad. So, he takes some time to really understand his own competitive nature. First, he researches competitiveness in general from a scientific perspective, as it applies to evolution. Then he explores when he first noticed his competitive nature. Then he really explores his current competitive nature. As a part of this, he realized that he wanted to stand out as a young boy, badly, to be paid attention to and valued by his father, who only valued exceptional things. He noticed that for him, winning is how he gets his sense of self-worth. He feels unmotivated to do anything if there's not competition involved. The competition also focuses him and drives him to be more successful in terms of his results. On top of this, Horatio realized that he really likes being in charge, and dominating in a competition makes him feel in charge. So let's look at what it would look like for Horatio to either make changes and shift his competitiveness, or to accommodate his competitiveness in a way that promotes positive outcomes and well-being for other people, or to do a mix of the two. If Horatio makes changes to and shifts his competitive nature, he would do something like let go of the idea that standing out above everyone else is the only way to get attention and go for attention in other ways. He might focus on building his self-worth in other ways and find friends who value other qualities in people than winning. He might put himself in situations where, let's say, he needs to cooperate rather than to compete. He might force himself to celebrate someone else's success and do trauma work on the trigger that arises as a result of doing this. To go in this direction is to make it so that he is no longer so competitive, but without being in rejection of his competitive nature. If Horatio chooses to accommodate his competitiveness in a way that promotes positive outcomes and well-being for other people, he would do something like acknowledge that because he needs his competitive nature for success at his career, and because he knows his competitive nature is so deeply embedded in him and he isn't very motivated to change it, he's going to warn people that he is a super competitive person so they can decide if they want to be around that or not. And he will not expect people who don't want to be around that to be in a relationship with him. He's going to select for environments where his competitive nature benefits others, like when he's on a team, and the more competitive he is, the more his team benefits. He's going to exercise his competitive nature through sports so he can get that pent-up need of himself out before he goes and visits his family. He's going to get into relationships with women who are not competitive and who support his ambitions and celebrate his wins, because competitive partners bring out the worst manifestations of his competitive nature, and he is going to create the boundary relative to himself that his competitive nature does not move him to do anything that compromises his integrity. If Horatio were to do a mix of the two, he might decide that by taking conscious ownership of his competitive nature, what is right to do is to do trauma work on the trigger of losing, as well as focus on building up his really low self-esteem because he doesn't want his competitive nature to be a cover-up. At the very same time, he may choose to put himself in environments like his current profession where his competitive nature is both encouraged and rewarded. And he may choose a partner who complements his competitive nature, at the same time as allow his competitive nature to be exercised in the safe container of athletic sports. What's important to see is that when you actually take ownership of an aspect of you that you have judged as bad, you are now in the position to do what is best for that aspect of you and with that aspect of you. You have a powerful resource on your side rather than an enemy, and you can become a good person even with that thing, because you know how to handle it and use it in a way that promotes positive outcomes and well-being for other people. After all, People may dislike a perfectionist until it's them going under the knife for surgery. And people may dislike someone with a competitive streak until that person plays for their team. And people may hate a conniver until they desperately need a new strategy. The only way to ensure that any aspect of you is in alignment with the well-being of others is to see and take ownership of the parts of you that could be against the best interests of others. The only way to be a good guy is to take ownership of what could make you a bad guy. Have a good week.